The decision to charge the Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan, with fraud hasn't wiped out an estimated 34, 35, maybe even 50 billion rand of the JSE Banks Index. It also brought to the fore political risk premium of investing in South Africa, and this unfolding economic and political drama in the country is certainly front of mind of anybody who's vaguely sensible. I'm Bruce Whitfield. This is your special edition of the Moneymakers, and joining me for this discussion, George Ganos, the Chief Economist and Managing Director at ETM Analytics, Annabelle Bishop, who's the Chief Economist at Investec, and Dr. Adrian Saville, the Chief Strategist at Cannon Asset Managers and also at Citadel Asset Management. Annabelle Bishop, this time yesterday it felt like a calamitous crisis. The markets, although unhappy and uncomfortable, haven't run panicked and screaming into the wilderness.
No, not as bad as Nenegate. And I think the Minister did exert a bit of calm over the markets yesterday, very quickly to the press, very quickly to say something to the media. And I think, the bottom line really is that there's a belief that we possibly will come through this quite easily on the other side, that it's not necessary that, he will be relieved of his position, because if you actually look at the charges themselves, they're not that severe compared to what else happens elsewhere in the public sector. It is fairly common practice. I think there are some technicalities.
Fraud is a charge, though. I mean, whether the contents of the fraud charge, it is still a fraud charge.
Yes.
Could one have the finance director of any company with a fraud charge hanging over them being the FD of that company? And would you invest in the company that had an FD facing a fraud charge, George Ganos?
No, I probably wouldn't. But as Annabelle said, I'm not sure that this is necessarily applicable in this case. So you probably would have done well to have a legal expert in here unpacking what those charges actually look like.
The charges are spurious.
They're spurious. And I think that maybe gives you some perspective as to why the markets haven't responded in the way that they did earlier this year, because, as Annabelle indicated, I suspect the same thing. He could probably get through this. Although I think a background concern to me is that they're pursuing it. They're going down this road still, despite the fact that perhaps the charges aren't that strong. We're still proceeding down this road, which speaks to political interference, and that is worrying. You don't want to be investing in a country where the uncertainty that gets levied over the markets is one that you cannot predict. You can't model for this. So when you can't model and you can't understand what on earth you're dealing with, you just crawl back into your shell.
Adrian Saville, there were two statements, one out of the Treasury and one from Pravin Gordhan's lawyers last night, essentially both saying the same thing but worded differently. The Treasury's was slightly stronger in that the Finance Minister is saying, well, I'm not stepping down over this. These are politically motivated, trumped-up charges. Essentially, the subtext was, if anybody wants me out, they're going to have to fire me. Is anybody going to have the gumption to do so?
The signalling, I think, is fairly clear. It's hard to escape the conclusion that this is political interference, that there is an agenda. But
the President last night from Kenya, where he's on a state visit, expressed once again his support for the Finance Minister.
Yeah, well, he might have expressed the support, but look at the reality. There it is. There's the bald evidence. And without question, there's an agenda going on here. The things we need to figure out is who's on the other end of the different strings, how robust is this agenda, and eventually what's the end game. Annabelle says that, well, I hear her saying this too shall pass. I don't want to put words in your mouth.
Essentially is what you're saying.
I'm saying it could pass. I'm not saying it will. I'm saying that it could if, the rule of law is properly applied and if he has a proper legal process. But obviously, the more political interference there is, the more difficult it is. And obviously, it is quite possible to put him on a stay of absence, to put someone else in his place temporarily, acting as the Finance Minister, and in that period, certain deals and certain things can actually come through. So that is the risk.
We've got the
BPS. Yeah.
But anyone can write that speech and read it.
There might be search and replace going on in that document.
Okay, I'm going to misquote Oscar Wilde, but in 1895 he wrote a play called The Importance of Being Earnest, and one of the characters in The Importance of Being Earnest has a really funny line, and she goes, Dr. Saville, losing one parent may be unfortunate, but to lose two parents smacks of carelessness. I would say, Mr. Zuma, to lose one finance minister may be unfortunate. To smack two smells of carelessness. But three looks deliberate. Because if Pravin Gordhan does go suspended, sacked or resigned, that'll be 3 finance ministers in the same amount of time it takes to have a baby. That is not particularly conducive to any level of confidence.
No, it's not. And to take a step back, one of the things that surprises me about the reaction to this is there's a lot of alarm bell ringing, and there's a sell-off in the currency of 3% yesterday. That's not a big move. Brexit, we sold 10 in the morning. But if it's up to the ratings agencies, or our concerns about the ratings agencies, to flag what's going wrong in South Africa, I don't think we've understood the problem.
No, we haven't. And certainly up until last week, George Galos, the ratings agencies would have been looking at us with a fair amount of circumspection, but suggesting that the Constitutional Court has held sway, the Supreme Court of Appeal is doing good and honest work, the High Court is doing good and honest work. Essentially, the important institutions of South Africa are doing remarkable work. That was last week. Might they hold a different view today?
I think the institutions are still okay. I mean, but to that point, there's a lot of speculation going on that ultimately all of this action, this political action that's taking place, is aimed at one thing, and that's a cabinet reshuffle, whereby we could get a new finance minister. Potentially, there's rumours that it could be someone like Brian Molefe, who's believed to be a Zuma-friendly cadre, in which case, then you start looking at other perhaps corroborating evidence, like whether or not the nuclear deal gets quickly signed. So there's a lot of background inference here.
Look, I didn't believe in conspiracy theories either until about the 9th of December last year, when suddenly every conspiracy theory ever shared contained a degree of plausibility. But here is Brian Molefe, who sits at Eskom, the king of the destruction of load shedding. We haven't had load shedding since he's been there, so we'll give him a tick for that. But I interviewed him fairly recently. I said, tell me about the Guptas. He said, why should I not do business with the Guptas? What's wrong with the Guptas? The Guptas have been found guilty of no wrongdoing. They are perfectly legitimate business people. We then see this week Tina Peterson has taken the opportunity, the nuclear opportunity, off the government balance sheet and popped it onto the Eskom balance sheet. And suddenly the conspiracy theory jigsaw puzzles start to fit, or don't they, Annabelle?
I think you might add to that the fact that the president also is now looking to be in charge of the parastatals themselves. So I think the concern really is, can South Africa afford a very large nuclear deal? And, in what form will it actually take? And will it be very efficient, or will there be government wastage? So I think all the points that you make are what is worrying both the financial markets. It's also what's worrying the credit rating agencies as well. That positive euphoria we had after the very democratic municipal elections that we had this year, and we saw obviously a big rally in the markets, has been destroyed by these recent events with Gordhan Gate. And I think going forwards now, the worry certainly is, how are we going to be placed from a credit rating agency perspective at the end of this year, when we have our review in the beginning of December? So the credit rating agencies have criticised South Africa historically since 1994 for not having enough political competition, for being a one-party state. Now that we're having increasing political competition going forwards, that should have been a positive tick for us. It should have been credit positive in our review in December. But obviously what they're going to be watching more closely now is what happens politically, and of course the performance of the state-owned entities themselves. And that obviously is a big millstone around the budget, the government finances neck already.
Now, Pravin Gordhan, the finance minister, just in case you missed it, I want to replay the response of the finance minister, Pravin Gordhan. He was at a big event yesterday where he was taking to the stage on a seminar on open tenders in Midrand, and he received the news that the NPA had popped around to his house and had been told he wasn't there, and then popped around to the office, and he wasn't there because he was doing his day job. This is what he had to say about the timing so soon after the New York visit, in which he'd assured investors that everything was rosy, and not long before that medium-term budget policy statement, which is just over 10 days away.
So what is it about this country, and some in this country, both at a political level and in the law enforcement agencies, who choose these times to do these things? When we've just come back telling all sorts of people, we find in South Africa, yes, no, we have, gloomy growth, but we can see green shoots. We can see the economy growing. And our message to all sorts of investors and people who want to assess our economic performance and fiscal performance is that if you give us another year or so, we'll show you South Africa can change, South Africa can adapt, South Africa can produce results which will not require anybody to consider putting us into so-called junk territory, something that will benefit all South Africans, not just a few.
That's Pravin Gordhan speaking yesterday, and of course he questioned also the Hawks' motives and the timing of this particular new round of attacks. The last time that the Hawks pounced was just a couple of days before the budget in February. Now, with just weeks to go before the medium-term budget policy statement, the Finance Minister was also questioning the motives of the Hawks.
This is a moment when South Africans should really ask themselves, who are the Hawks, or these few people in the Hawks, really serving? Where do they get their political instructions from, and for what purpose? When all that we are trying to do within the Treasury is represent South Africa, make sure we manage its finances properly, present the best foot forward that we can on behalf of the country, and do that which is right, whether it is in respect of university fees, or more housing to be built, or more money to be made available for the right kind of procurement purposes, or anything that a normal treasury does in any normal country.
That's the Finance Minister, Pravin Gordhan, at yesterday's event. And he maintained his sense of humour and he maintained his sense of composure. Could you focus, Adrian Saville, on your day job if you had an outstanding speeding ticket and you were worried that on your way to work, not that you speed, because you still ride a motorbike, but if you did, hypothetically, have an outstanding speeding ticket, I mean, you'd be worried about being stopped at some kind of roadblock and being held to account for that speeding ticket. There's something quite special about South Africa where we operate on a different level in terms of our concern around what people think of us.
I think unquestionably there has to be an elevated stress going on here, and the analogy is about the duck bobbing along very nicely on top of the water and the feet are going furiously underneath. I suspect that that's what Pravin Gordhan's head or mind might have been doing.
How can you concentrate on your day job?
I think...
and is that the point?
That's exactly the point, is I think there is an appearance of calm, and absolutely, this is what you need from leadership, is this appearance of calm, everything's under control, don't panic. If you'd gone to the podium and said, guys, head for the hills, there's big mistake this morning, I've got to be home. Well, all bets are off.